हेलो हेलो। Hello? Hello? Yeah, I have joined. Okay, all right.
Yeah, you can unmute and open your video. I'm going to start now. Uh, Good evening, everybody, and a very warm welcome to all of you. On behalf of the Delhi NCR chapter of IMA Alumni Association, I on behalf of my team, which is the Executive Council of the Association, I welcome all of you, and especially Dr. Jayant Dasgupta for having agreed to enlighten all of us on very hot and current topic of US tariffs. 25% or 50%, we are all worried that what is Trump going to do? And at the same time, we all think that we should not cow into his bullying and blackmailing. So, without wasting too much of your time, I'll hand over the stage and the mic to Dr. Jayant Dasgupta, who is been through the thick and thin of trade negotiations, and people who've heard him knows that he to say that he's extremely knowledgeable on this subject. So look forward to a very fruitful and a knowledgeable and enlightening session from Dr. Dasgupta. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Anil Somani, and for the rather flattering introduction. I really look forward to having an interactive session with the alumni of this very esteemed institution of India, a center of excellence, not only in India, but acknowledged all over the world. Without further ado, I would like to outline what I would cover in the course of my presentation. It will last approximately 20 minutes. And after that, we could have a question and answer session for as long as the participants desire. So the first thing I wanted to mention in my presentation is the genesis of this problem that we are facing, not only us, but as President Trump has said, more than 100 countries on which the administration of the US has was intending or is in the process of imposing reciprocal tariffs. Now, the genesis of the problem is twofold. One is the support base of the president. The Make in America Great Again support group, which basically, of course, it has a cross-section of people from high income brackets, from the middle income brackets, and the lower income brackets, and farmers. But his constituents predominantly are from the lower income brackets and from, in terms of numbers, and from the agriculture industry people. So, of course, the lower income people would also comprise a lot of working class people who had been working in various industries or who have been thrown out of jobs because of the slow and steady deindustrialization from the of the US, which has made the jobs in the low skilled, low technology areas more and more scarce in the US, because these have all shifted to offshore locations which have a cheaper labor rate. Now, this is something which has been going on for the past 40, 50 years at least. This, in fact, there are several pointers to this. One of them is the moving or the shutting down almost completely of the textiles and clothing industry, which is a kind of a barometer of a country's industry moving up from low-skilled jobs to higher skilled ones. Now, the USA, the president's support base has been affected badly by the deindustrialization in the low-skilled jobs and the high trade deficit, which the US has also been suffering from. So President Trump, it is not during his current stint, but he had a stint from 2017 to 2020. And even before that, when he was a talk show host, if you search on the web, his interview with Oprah Winfrey many decades ago showed that he thought that raising tariffs was going to be the most important tool in the hands of the US administration to overcome several problems. One of them was, of course, the growing unemployment amongst the lower skilled people, the poorer people. The second was, of course, the trade deficit from which the US has been suffering for quite a long time. Now, when we talk of trade deficit, we and President Trump has this in mind, it is only trade in goods. Now, as the services sector has 9 different sections according to the US classification. And one of them, of course, is also uh, repayment or reimbursement of royalties and payments on account of usage of intellectual property rights owned by US companies abroad, which are repatriated to the US. For instance, Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and a host of the pharmaceutical companies which have offshored their production facilities in many countries of the world. So they have these patent rights, or there are other kinds of intellectual property rights like copyrights, trademarks, etc. So all these also account for a substantial amount of money flowing back into the United States on account of payments of royalties, etc. Now, President Trump does not take this into account at all about the surplus which the US holds, trade surplus which the US holds in services. If you take US's global export of services and the imports that it effects. So, what he is confining himself to is only goods. And goods has two distinct branches. One is industrial products, and the other one is agricultural products. And agriculture includes dairy, it includes wines and spirits, but does not include fish. Fish, for some strange reason, has been considered an industrial product, perhaps because more than a half a century ago, uh, Europe and then Japan, and then succeeded by Korea and other countries, saw industrial uh, scale shipping, fishing fleets develop and take it up on a commercial scale, which led to the large scale exports of fish by these fishing fleets. And in the classification of the WTO, this figures as an industrial product. Now, the point is that this was the genesis of the problem. And President Trump has been a strong advocate that tariffs would hold the key to unlocking this problem and to providing a solution to the US administration to overcome this trade deficit. One, two, to provide reindustrialization of the US economy. And by reindustrialization, of course, the original uh, aim was to have industries across the board, starting from low skilled ones to the high tech ones, getting rejuvenated. But what he is focusing now is on high tech industries like semiconductors, electronics, pharmaceuticals, which is also a high tech industry in the sense that these large corporations, which spend a lot of money in developing blockbuster drugs, which are basically drugs which sell more than $1 billion overall in the world are called blockbuster drugs. So these are the high-tech industries which he wants uh, to rejuvenate in the US and bring in investments from around the world into the US on the threat that tariffs will be high. So if you have a manufacturing base anywhere else, you will be subjected to very high tariffs, and it would be better for you to produce in the US. So this is the basic motivation. Now, as you all know, in February, PM Modi had a meeting with President Trump. And of course, the intentions were quite clear of President Trump soon after he was inaugurated in January of this year, that he would go ahead and impose tariffs. So Prime Minister Modi had, in his meeting on the 13th of February 2025, he had chalked out a plan of action with President Trump of getting into a bilateral trade agreement with the US and to start negotiations for that, for which there would be two tranches. The first tranche would be harvested sometime in late fall, around October of this year, and the next one sometime in the first half of 2026. This was the plan of action. Now, in April, pres- so in President Trump, in his through his executive orders, he imposed tariffs. He announced tariffs in February itself. Then he paused those tariffs. Then in April, he again paused those tariffs and allowed countries to engage in trade talks, in negotiations with the US. And he had indicated a set of tariffs which countries could expect to be slapped with. And they varied. For instance, China was told that they would have to pay a tariff of about 145%, India 26%, and so on. Now, this period ended on the 1st of August. So, by which time, of course, India had been negotiating, but I will come to it in a moment. It did not really lead to a firm agreement at the end of July. So I will come to it in a moment. But there were other countries like the European Union, which agreed to accept a tariff of 15% on almost all its products. Of course, about 90% of its products going to the US. And in return, they did not get any concessions from the US. On top of this 15% tariffs, the European Union accepted to invest about $600 billion over a period of 2-3 years. And the details are not known yet. And also buy about $750 billion worth of oil and gas and military equipment from the US. Similarly, Japan accepted a tariff of 15% against almost no concession, and also a promise of investing at least $500 billion over the next few years. Korea also fell in line, $350 billion worth of investments. Also, I think there is some earmarking of investments in the shipbuilding industry, which the US wants to revive because shipbuilding has dwindled in the US, and 15% tariffs. Vietnam accepted 20% tariffs and 40% tariffs for any transshipment of goods from China. Now, the details of all these trade negotiations and the final agreement are not known. They are still being, I think, finalized. The drafts are in a state of preparation, works in progress. In our neighborhood, Thailand, Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, they have all accepted tariffs ranging from about 19% to slightly higher. I think Indonesia, Philippines, 19%, Vietnam, 20%, Thailand, I don't recall, but all of them have accepted. Uh, Canada stood out, but mind you, there is an agreement was, which is a follow-up agreement to the old NAFTA of 1992, which was negotiated between U.S., Mexico, and Canada in the time of Bill Clinton. That uh, was discarded, and a fresh agreement was signed, which is known as USMCA, US Mexico Canada Agreement on Trade, which was finalized during President Trump's first term. Now, 85% of Canadian products going into the US are exempt from any import tariffs. But for the balance 15%, President Trump has imposed about 35% tariffs, even on Canada. On Mexico, similar 85 to 90% of the products are coming into the US duty free. But for the balance, he has been threatening, and the Mexicans have been in talks, but uh, the talks have not concluded yet. So this is the scenario. China, uh, because they shut off the rare earth magnets exports to the US, which feed into a large number of industries, including autos, but a lot of other electronic dependent industries. That led to the laying off of thousands of workers in the US and put pressure on President Trump to come to a deal. Of course, he made out that the Chinese were also very keen. But what happened was that the tariffs for China were brought down from 155% to 145% to 55%. But they have also not been imposed as yet. There has been a 90-day reprieve given to China. So this is, and talks are going on, but it appears that the US will tread a much softer line towards China because it is in a position to retaliate. Of course, the rare earth magnets is a strategic tool in their hands, but they have a host of other tools as well, including shutting off soya imports from the US and a wide range of other agricultural products which they buy, and which can lead to a great deal of distress amongst the US agricultural community, which are strong supporters of the president. So this is where matters stand. Now, on the 1st of August, or I think, sorry, the 31st of July, President Trump announced that since the talks had failed, India would attract a tariff of 25%. And soon thereafter, he added two more conditions. The primary condition was that India should stop importing Russian oil because it was fueling the Russian war effort against Ukraine. And two, that of course it did not get the same degree of importance, but he also mentioned about Russian purchases of arms and ammunition from Russia by India. One of the other things which he has been laying emphasis on is that the BRICS, the group of countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and a few others which have also joined, like Ethiopia, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and the others. Now, but the primary focus is on these 5 BRICS nations, that they are basically an anti-US coalition of countries which are trying collectively to introduce de-dollarization in the global economy, to which he is opposed very strongly. And he had earlier, a few months ago, he had mentioned that he could impose tariffs of 100% on BRICS countries. Very recently, he has mentioned that BRICS countries, 100%, of course, he's not reiterated, but he has indicated that BRICS countries, being a member of BRICS, would lead to the imposition or acceptance of higher tariffs by a country. So this is where matters stand today. On the 7th of August, with effect from the 7th of August, that is yesterday, American time, 25% tariffs have been imposed on Indian goods entering the US. But of course, goods which were shipped before the 7th of August and which enter, I think, around before the 5th or 6th of October will be subjected to the earlier baseline tariff of 10%. And a 21-day window has been given to India to negotiate on whether it wants to continue with importing Russian oil, or it accepts the US conditions, which basically say that India has to align itself to the interests of the US. And that 27-day window will perhaps end around the 27th or 28th of August. This is another window which was given. If India continues to import Russian oil, then it would have another 25%. So 25 plus 25, 50% tariffs on all products, which has an exception of 3-4 products. One of the important products which are exempted are mobile phones. The second one, as of now, are semiconductors. But yesterday only, he gave an indication that semiconductors will be subjected to 100% tariffs if they do not have, the company does not have a manufacturing base, or it is not intending to set up a manufacturing base in the US. So Apple mobile phones, for instance, Apple has promised to invest about $600 billion in the US, mainly in developing semiconductor facilities, but other high-tech facilities aligned to its uh, product base of computers, other kinds of hardware, mobile phones, very importantly. So this is the second thing. The third thing is pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals, he has allowed exemption to these products for the time being, but he has indicated that it will go up to 250% eventually in stages, with one stage being about 100 or 150%, which would be the intermediate stage. Now, as you know, amongst India's exports to the US, engineering goods form the largest group of products. The second one is, um, sorry, the second one is pharmaceuticals and petroleum products. Petroleum products which are made out of refined products which are made out of oil from all locations, but increasingly, because about 36 to 40% of our oil imports, crude oil imports, are from Russia, a good share of the petroleum product exports to the US would be from Russian oil. So irrespective of whether we have made it from Russian oil or Saudi Arabian oil or oil from some other place, it would be subjected to 25% to start with and 50% eventually. The other 2-3 important areas of exports of India are gems and jewelry, which has a large share of cut and polished diamonds, studded jewelry, including jewelry made of gold or silver and or other precious metals with gold with diamonds or other precious stones in the jewelry. The value addition uh, in the gems and jewelry sector is not very high, because we have to import all the uncut, unpolished diamonds from various places, including from the US. And gold, as you know, and silver also we have to import. So the value addition is not very high in uh, gems and jewelry. The last two items which we export, which are of note, are textiles and clothing, and leather products, and some plastic products. So this is uh, the the broad range of products which have already been slapped with 25% and could attract another 25% tariffs. Now, what is the recourse that India has at the moment? There are a few options which I would like to list out. I think I have already spoken for about 25 minutes, so I'll have to close. Uh, One of the options is to stop buying Russian oil, which has been discussed. Why can't we stop buying Russian oil? Especially if the US is willing to sell us oil, which it sells in the open market. Anybody can buy it. So that is one option. The second option is that we have mentioned a few red lines. One is dairy imports into India from the US. The the other red line comprises soya and maize or corn, and associated with it is the introduction of genetically modified foods, which includes cereals, like rice, like wheat, and other products uh, which are grown in large quantities in the US, of course, also with very large uh, US farm subsidies, and they should be allowed at near zero duty to to come to India. So these are the red lines which India had mentioned, and it is understood, though not confirmed, that for more than 80% of the industrial products which um, the US produces, India had offered near zero duty or zero duty access into India. But this does not satisfy the US. So, one of the options, as I discussed, is to stop buying Russian oil. The second option, which may not, uh, you know, uh, allow India to escape from this 25% additional tariffs, is to lift our restrictions on dairy imports, dairy product imports, and on corns and soya and GM food. But it may not allow us to get off this, get off the hook and escape this 25% additional tariffs. The third option is not to do anything, but as has been coming out in various statements from Indian leaders, that we will stand firm. We will not dilute the red lines that we have mentioned. We have already made good offers. We are open to negotiations, but this is where matters stand. So the onus lies on the US to accept it, to negotiate with us, to find out if they can move forward, or we can, yield some ground in some other area. And that is where matters stand now, as far as the bilateral negotiations are concerned. The other thing I wanted to mention in this context is that 5 rounds of negotiations, fairly detailed negotiations, have taken place on the first tranche of the bilateral trade agreement between India and the US, which of course will also subsume these tariff concessions which we have offered to the US, but will also have other things built into it. Now, these talks have been going on since February on a parallel track. And another round of the negotiations, which was perhaps going to be the last or the penultimate round of negotiations, was to start from the 25th of August. A US delegation was to come to India to participate in the delegation, in the talks. Yesterday, President Trump has mentioned in the course of a press conference that till this issue of Russian oil is resolved, there will be no further talks. So that bilateral trade agreement, which could have been the third option or the fourth option, has been ruled out for the moment. That through that we could have, had a reprieve, and we could have mended our fences. So this is where matters stand. The last point I wanted to raise is what recourse, other recourse does India have? Can it file a complaint in the WTO? Does it have any hope of getting redressal of its grievances? Now, in the WTO, there are three distinct legs, as we say, of the structure of the agreements. One is the negotiating leg, which is getting into new agreements in new areas like fisheries subsidies, for instance, or environmental products, and so on, gender, labor standards, etc. The second leg, which is the most important one at this juncture, is the dispute settlement leg between countries. And the third one is monitoring of the uh, performance of countries in terms of their abiding by their commitments to other countries made in the WTO. Now, as far as the WTO is concerned, every country has to give a schedule that it will not cross a certain import tariff level for each product. That is known as the bound tariff. So it is bound by its words, and it is bound by the upper ceiling to which it can go without attracting any penalty from the other countries. Now, the US's bound tariffs are if you take the average, it is less than 4%. It is between 3 and 4. By this baseline tariff of 10% itself, the US had violated its obligations to the WTO. By now imposing even higher tariffs, it is even more in violation. The other thing is the WTO prevents any country from discriminating amongst other WTO members, and they have to give the same treatment, same tariff treatment to all countries. Now, as I just mentioned, Europe, Japan, and Korea are getting 15%, India 25 plus perhaps 25 more. So this is another violation. Now, as far as the dispute settlement system is concerned, there are two things which came about in the WTO when it was formed in 1995 from the old GATT. One was that it transformed into a two-stage system. Like the first stage, lower stage, is a dispute settlement panel, which gives a ruling. It's normally a three-member panel, which gives a ruling on a dispute between two countries, and that is appealable. And the appeal is heard by a permanent body of 7 experts, which is known as the appellate body. And an appellate body member is selected by consensus for the first term for 4 years. And it is extendable by another 4 years, after which the appellate body member has to retire. Now, the US, and I don't blame President Trump for this, even in President Obama's stint, the US was dragging its feet in providing, in allowing new members to be selected for manning the appellate body posts. President Trump, of course, in his first stint, stopped it completely. No new members were selected. So the old ones started retiring one by one. And by December 2019, there was no member left in the 7-member appellate body, and 3 members at least are required to hear an appeal. So unless you have a country has been given the opportunity to exhaust its appeal, option, nothing becomes final. So since the appellate body is non-functional, India does not have the option of going to the WTO and getting redress for its for the US's violation. The other countries also which have been affected do not have that option. So that is where matters stand as far as redressal of the grievance is concerned. And I will stop here. And I'm sorry I have taken up much more than I intended to of your time, but I would be very happy to have a discussion and answer questions to the best of my ability.
So, thank you, Dr. Dasgupta, for such an insightful lecture. Anybody, if he has a question, can raise their hand, and then the host will unmute them. I
Yeah.
have a question.
I will just like to be excused for 2 minutes.
All right.
So what we could do, Anil, am I audible, Anil?
Yeah, very audible.
So whoever has any question can raise their hands, and probably the time would permit about 10 questions that people can ask, and then we can unmute them in that order.
Perfect. Huh? Right.
So friends, anyone has any questions, please raise your hands, or a point of view that you want to share with the larger team.
I had a question, so when he comes back, then I'll ask that. Vilas, you have a question, right?
I request people who have a question to raise the hands on Zoom itself.
I'm very sorry. I had to,
Not
attend
an
to
issue.
something. So I'm very sorry.
Not an issue.
Yes, please.
So I had a question, and before the others, I'll just start with my question. That you mentioned that WTO will not help, and anyways, Donald Trump, the kind of person that he is, and we've come to know him, he's not a stickler for rules and these bodies at all. He's imposed emergency in USA, and he's almost like a monarch or a tyrant, that I would like to call him. And my question specific is that you mentioned that when he imposed this 145% tariffs on China, and what actually happened, is there any way that India can pressure US or Donald Trump into seeing that, well, yes, this does not, Trump goes back and reverses on his tariffs and duties that he has imposed?
Well, the short answer is that you have to have some strategic tool which the US needs desperately, and it is not going to be provided by other countries. India is either the only country or the one which will supply 90% or thereabouts of that product, and there is no such product which India produces. So I don't think India has that leverage with respect to the US. And the other point I wanted to mention is that if you look at our exports, we export about 437, $40 billion worth of goods to all countries in the world. $87 billion of that came from the US, and near about figure for all of Europe and UK combined was there, about $90 billion or thereabouts. So it is our largest market. The third point is that China is our important partner in trade, because we import a lot of products from China worth more than $100 billion, but our exports to China are only about $17 billion. So we don't really have that leverage at all over the US.
on export of services or slapping heavy duty on their services into India?
Well, services, because of the peculiar kind of, service, the beast that they are, there are no duties or tariffs on services. You can only have, other kinds of barriers like national treatment, like, if you had not given a WTO commitment about market opening in a particular service, that was one thing. So you can retaliate, but in services, India exports about $33 billion worth of services to the US, and the US exports about $41 billion. And over and above this $33 billion of services from India, you also have a very large number of Indians going to the US on H-1B visas and working there. So they also contribute to inward remittances. And mind you, India is the country with the largest quantum of inward remittances, which is more than $120 billion. So a lot of it comes from the US as well. So the US will have ample opportunity to retaliate if we try to do that in services.
Samir, you can ask your
Sure.
question.
No, we have Eklavya who has a question. Eklavya.
Sure. Thanks for this session. It has been a really educational one. I just had the thing is that in terms of the options that you have mentioned, it seems that that doesn't seem really something that is very concrete that India can be doing right now. Is there a possibility that in order to come up with something, we might be driven back to the kind of relations we had with Russia in the past, which had been much closer, given the kind of stance that the US is having, and potentially mediated by Russia, paradoxically might be having more improved relations with China as a result of this move that has happened, in your opinion, sir?
Thank you, Eklavya. Yes, an enemy's enemy becomes a friend, according to the old adage. But Prime Minister Modi is going to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting. President Lula of Brazil has also been, the recipient of 50% tariffs. And the reason for slapping these high tariffs, Brazil actually has a trade deficit with the US for the past few years. But still, it has been slapped with tariffs. The reason being that President Trump's old friend, President Bolsonaro, ex-President Bolsonaro, is not, according to President Trump, being treated fairly. And there is some prosecution going on of President Bolsonaro, etc. So the reason given for slapping 50% tariffs on Brazil is just the treatment of President Bolsonaro. That's it. So President Lula has mentioned that he would like to reach out to the other BRICS leaders, and he's given an indication that it would be to form a kind of a common front against the US and its unjustified and unwarranted tariffs which it is imposing. So that is the second thing, that it is a work in progress, maybe. And President Putin has also come out in support of India, that it is being treated unfairly by the US tariffs. So perhaps we could see some kind of a common front emerge, and new trade flows start to take place amongst these countries. But it is not going to take place overnight. It is likely to take time before it starts really developing its own character, and the volumes of trade start growing. So I think that is, in the medium to long run, that is, of course, going to be there. But European Union has to be a part of this group, Japan, Korea, and the other big traders of the world, they also need to be associated or aligned with this group so that we can forge a common front and set up some kind of an understanding to tackle the high US tariffs.
Thanks for that. Thanks.
Dr. Dasgupta, you did touch upon it, right? Since the conversations around tariffs have happened and these have been slapped on us, the markets have remained relatively calmer, right? So, which means they have a certain way of looking at how these could be rhetorics, especially and even the fact that India has remained relatively quieter, right? It has not really buckled under. Does it really suggest that the options that you listed out, where not doing anything immediately probably has more merit than basically doing anything untowards right now, because none of these options is a win-win option for India right now. And you did touch upon it in terms of the alternate routes or relationships coming up, because the way the larger world is reacting to the tariffs, most of the people are thinking these are rhetorics, and he will soon realize, because ultimately tariffs are, the costs are always going to be passed on to the consumers, and the inflationary effects this will have onto the American consumers, which is lose-lose proposition. So while it will take time, but do you think this is the kind of a trigger that the world needs, in terms of the alternate mechanism, maybe the BRICS or the the other forms of entities coming together much strongly, the quads of the world or so?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting and topical question. The world has not seen anything like the present incarnation of President Trump in terms of, completely uh, autonomous and unilateral action based on scant facts, sometimes no facts at all, like the tariffs on Brazil. Ex-president Bolsonaro is being prosecuted according to the national laws of Brazil. So what does the US have to do with that? Anyway, the important point is that I think it is a wake-up call to diversify our exports to the extent possible so that we are not hugely dependent. 17-18% of our total goods exports are directed towards the US. So this is a wake-up call that we should try to diversify and bring it down. That is one thing. The second point that you raised about the share market not really reacting to this. Well, the share market, I think, was expecting something between 15 and 20% tariffs in any case. That is the understanding that I have. And 25% is something which, they could have lived with. In fact, industry sources say that the suppliers or exporters of India could have absorbed some 3-4%, passed on some 2% of the burden to the importers, and it could trade could have, of course, it would have shrunk, but it could have gone on. But another additional 25%, I think Baba Kalyani has mentioned it yesterday. He said this, you can forget about trade, whether it is 50% or 100% or 500%, you just can forget about it. So the share market, if you look at the exporters who are in the market, apart from some very large corporations, and the names, petroleum products and a few other things, gems and jewelry is exported by medium-sized enterprises. Their exports may be large in terms of value, but they are not corporate entities. Many of them are not even listed companies. Similar is the case with textiles and clothing. Engineering goods is uh, a very large product group, and it includes all kinds of things. So you know the and they are not listed on the stock market. They are not being exported by large corporations whose share values can go up or down. So that is the reason I think that the share prices in India have not reflected the imposition of tariffs. The third point I wanted to mention is that Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs have carried out some studies just a day or two ago, and one of the pessimistic, I think, projections is that, I think by Goldman Sachs, that this 50% could bring about a reduction in our GDP growth rate by about 0.8% up to that. So from 6.5, if you lose 0.8%, that is quite a substantial thing. But the more optimistic projections are that it will cost between 0.2 and 0.3% of our GDP growth. So it will affect our economy, but maybe not very deeply.
Yeah.
Especially if we can develop alternative destinations for our exports. If we conclude our FTA with the EU, which we are slated to conclude by this year end, we have already done so with respect to the UK. And if we can deepen and widen our FTAs with existing FTAs with Japan, Korea, with the ASEAN, which are, they have a review mechanism built into the FTAs. So they can be widened and deepened, because the other countries are also affected very badly by US tariffs.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Dasgupta. Vikas, then Vilas. We are about 5 minutes, sir. Is it okay if we just go over 10 minutes
Yes,
or so?
yes, yes.
No.
I
Okay.
have time.
Sure.
Thank you.
So we have 4 more questions till
Yes, please. Yes,
Sargunjit.
yes.
So Vikas, over to you. Please begin.
Thanks, Amir, and Dr. Dasgupta, thank you so much for your time and for the insights. The question I had was the way China reacted to the US. They, threatened with their own counter tariffs, which India, for example, has not done. So I was keen to understand your views on why that is the case and the pros and cons of if India were to do that. The second, and maybe the related question as well, is that at the end of the day, what Trump is basically bargaining is the huge US market. And I think the fact may remain that it may be tough for India to find alternative markets. And the question is, what of what India has is something which will not be that easy for the US to find. So, for example, if we talk about gems and jewelry, does India actually need to eat up the tariff? So eventually, the imports may decline, but if the US customer pays for it, and therefore the impact on India may be less. Let me just pause here, just keen to understand your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Again, a very important question. If you look at our import basket from the US, what do we import? We import things which are required to keep the wheels of our industry moving. Our economy, can move forward. We are buying fertilizers. We are buying some chemicals. We are buying capital goods, which are again required for our industry. We are buying some amount of oil, mineral oils, and other industrial products. Of course, some high technology items like the medical equipment, medical devices, etc. We are also buying, but a lot of things are basically intermediate products which are required by our own industry. So even in the first Trump stint, when he imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum on 7 countries and country groups, India was one of the victims. We didn't retaliate for quite some time, and then we did a kind of a symbolic retaliation by imposing tariffs on just 28 products. And these were various kinds of nuts and berries and agricultural items, which didn't have very large exports to, the US didn't have large exports to India, but these were being raised or grown by people who owed a strong allegiance to the Republican Party. So it was meant as a symbolic gesture. And later on, of course, under the Biden administration, we got into a compromise agreement. So we withdrew our tariffs. But this was only symbolic. Uh, the other point that you raised about China, uh, China imports a huge amount of products from the US. Of course, it has also a very large surplus against the US, the largest. But it is in a position to retaliate. And two, China has the ability to, to withstand losses, continue its production, absorb the losses, and sell at below cost because of its deep pockets. And three, China is also trying to sell goods to countries, so that they can be sent ultimately to the US if the products of these second countries attract a lower tariff. That is, in technical parlance, it is called circumvention of the sanctions. Now, the US is aware of this, and so the countries have been threatened. That is why Vietnam will attract a further tariff of 20% if it indulges in transshipment of goods from China, or circumvention of the agreement. But it could attract further sanctions. So this is why China is in a position to retaliate, and we are not. If we try to raise tariffs on the products that we import from the US, we would be harming our own economic interests.
Thank you. Vilas, over to you. Vilas, could you hear us? Vilas, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Vilas. In the meantime, Sargunjit, if you want to proceed, and then once Vilas is audible, then we can go over to him. Sargunjit.
Good evening, sir. So
Good
my
evening.
question to you is that could this situation be turned out a blessing in disguise for us, as we can use this situation to boost our domestic manufacturing industrial setup?
Yes, it can be looked at that way. But of course, the primary thing which needs to be done for boosting our domestic consumption is that we have to carry out a lot of domestic reforms, one. And two, we have to also provide money in the hands of people who are large consumers or could potentially be large consumers. So at the moment, if you look at the consumption pattern, the lower income group of India, and we have a very large number of uh, landless labor in the rural areas. After COVID, a lot of labor has shifted from the uh, MSME sector, small industries, small services suppliers, to the rural areas, and have fallen back on agriculture. Now they have hardly any buying capacity. So, this question of this 1% and 99%, you have to also, carry out domestic reforms, reduce the costs of production. That will also enable you to become internationally or globally competitive. So you can then start exporting as well once you have carried out your domestic reforms and you have brought in new technology, new investments. So I think it is, which comes first, whether the chicken or the egg. That is the kind of question. But uh, one of the things which has, I think, come into sharp focus is that we need to carry out domestic reforms, bring down our costs of production, our costs of transaction, and try to become, globally competitive in the products that we are producing currently or could produce in the short term or medium term.
Thank you. Vilas, I don't think we can still hear you. Maybe if you want to type in your question, Vilas, then I can read it out for Dr. Dasgupta to answer. In the meantime, Chandrika.
Can you hear
Yes,
me?
yes, yes, you're audible now, Vilas. Please carry on. We can hear you now.
Yeah. Excellent presentation, sir.
Thank you.
My question was about possibility of retaliation. I'm not teaching for it. Things like Facebook, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, pure services. We can do without them. Or Visa, MasterCard, Coke, Pepsi, Colgate, or Boeing F-35, etc., etc. I'm sure the negotiators are aware of this. It's pluses and minuses, both.
Yes. Of course, we had this digital tax in place till the 1st of April. When in the budget we withdrew that because the
That's right.
US administration had indicated that they thought very poorly of that of the digital tax. So we did it voluntarily and as a gesture towards smoothening the path ahead of getting into a bilateral trade agreement. But we could impose that once again. But that would be considered as a gesture of retaliation by the Trump administration, and it has indicated that any effort at retaliation would attract even higher duties. So we have to be aware of the consequences.
Yeah, I
And
know.
one of the things which can take place is, denial of H-1B visas, for instance, for our people. Services exports can come under, uh, closer scrutiny and perhaps, invisible sanctions, etc. So that is there. Of course, as far as arms purchases are concerned, uh, you know, there was a stray item which came out in the papers about 6 P-81 Poseidon aircraft for naval surveillance. That apparently has been put on hold, but there is a Ministry of Defense statement which has also come out today saying that no such thing has happened. So one doesn't know where does the truth lie. But I think it would take place without any, formal announcement or tom-tomming about it, about our retaliation. But the message would go across that if you raise tariffs, we will also go slow on our defense procurement. And as far as the aircraft purchases are concerned, uh, they are done by the private airlines. We don't have a national airlines apart from, I think, Air India Express now. So, or is it also now part of the Air India? I think it is part of the Air India group now. So, they are purely private decisions about buying, and they take place over a long period of time, and the supplies also take place over a long period of time. So, I don't think really that offers an opportunity. Arms purchases, yes, because that is something on which the government has control.
Sir, also consumer non-durables, consumable items. So many
Yes,
are being made in India and dividends are being repatriated.
that is true. But, that can also cause.
Both ways. It works both
Yes,
ways.
yes, yes. That's true.
Everything works both ways.
So thank
Yes.
you. Thank you,
Thank
Vilas.
you, sir. Thank you.
Chandrika, over to you. And then let's plan to close it. Oh, there's Harveer as well. So just two more questions, Chandrika
Yes,
and
that's
Harveer.
fine. That's fine.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Chandrika, over to you. Chandrika, if you can hear us, otherwise, Harveer, over to you.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Dasgupta. First of all, thank you for a very, very, lucid explanation of what promises to be a very, very fast changing situation. What we say tonight may not be true by the time the sun rises tomorrow morning, right? My question is a little bit hypothetical, but please indulge. Uh, in the sense that, what are the options before India? One is to continue the negotiations. Yes, there is 25% tariff, but that penalty doesn't kick in for another 3 weeks or so, right? So should we continue negotiating, or, we use this as a forcing mechanism, this opportunity to diversify our trade and our partnerships with the likes of EU, UK, so on and so forth, and just wait out Trump, because frankly, he's got about 3 years to go, and we use these 3 years to to diversify away from the US, knowing well that if we agree to a kind of a lopsided deal with the US, it may prove to be very hard to unwind going forward. So is it right to think in terms of 3 years of pain for a medium term, long term gain, or your recommendation is that we should just go because US is so important?
Uh, I think Mr. Sameer Jain summarized this very well. The issue is that if you start negotiating only on these tariffs of 25% plus a possible 25% more. So suppose you stop buying Russian oil. The oil prices, and India buys a substantial amount of oil from Russia. 13% of the oil is bought by Russia, by India from Russia. About 20 to 23% is bought by the European Union. It buys even more oil and gas from Russia. Now, if we were to shut off, and China hypothetically were also to stop buying Russian oil and gas, the prices in the global market will rise. And that would have an impact on our finances, because more money would be required. We buy about 86% of our oil from outside, crude oil. Now, the US also will not remain untouched. It will also get hit by this. So, inflationary pressures will start building up in the US also, if hypothetically India and China were to stop buying oil. The other thing which I wanted to place before you is that, there are lobbies, and there would be people who would be affected. People who are, I think about 37%, or at least more than 30% of our garment exports goes to, I'm sorry, around $17 billion worth of garment exports we are making, apparel exports, and of that, about $3 billion goes to the US. So it's a substantial market. And, they are low skilled people who work in these industries, textiles and clothing and leather. So, depending on who you are talking to, they would say, please make a compromise. Please accept the conditions of the US. Now, if we come to that, suppose we stop buying Russian oil. President Trump's people will say, but we also mentioned arms and ammunition purchases from the Russians. Have you stopped that? So you will have to stop that. The third thing they will say after that, possibly, could be, have you walked out of BRICS? Please do that, because we said you will attract additional tariffs, and this would be equivalent to 25%. So you walk out of BRICS. So you literally align yourself to US interests of the moment. It could change. So there is no stopping the Trump administration from saying this is the full stop, the final stop. We don't make additional demands on India after this. There is no such thing. So that is the problem with negotiating with President Trump. And on dairy products, I didn't mention this. It is not about tariffs, because we are one of the cheapest producers of dairy products in the world. But that is barring the subsidies that these developed countries give in huge value terms. The other problem is that US cattle is fed on animal remains and animal blood extracts. Now, whether the milk powder which is produced from the milk of a cow which has been fed on animal extracts, will be acceptable to Indian buyers, or it could cause even riots in India. So there are these, as we call them, sanitary and phytosanitary standards to which the US is not able to comply with. And when you export anything to the US, you have to comply with their SPS, or sanitary and phytosanitary standards. So that is a problem in conceding on all the red lines also. So the last point I wanted to mention is, and Mr. Samir Jain has mentioned this, that there were a lot of imports made in a flurry between, let's say, late January to about April, May, of all the large volume items which common people consume, like clothing, like leather, like plastic household utensils, other things which people consume, common people consume. Now all those things will have stopped the inflationary pressure in the US, but their supplies will run out in another 4 or 5 months time. And by October, November, the prices would start rising if President Trump continues to keep these tariffs in place. The minimum is 10% on the UK, which hardly exports any item of common use, and the EU also 15%. So this will be passed on to the consumer, and the inflationary pressure would start rising. And by 26th November, you have the midterm elections coming up. The Republicans have a majority in both houses, Senate as well as Congress. So they would be under serious pressure. So it is the expectation of many pundits that by about spring, March or so of next year, I think President Trump would be forced to roll back most of these tariffs. There would be so much of pressure, backlash from the American public as well as from the Republicans themselves.
Sure. Great. Great. Thank you, Dr. Dasgupta. Just to sum it up, first of all, congratulations on sharing such an insightful thought with us. We take back a lot of learnings. To summarize, you talk about the macroeconomic stability would still be there. I mean, India, because 60-70% of our GDP is still home consumption based. And while we would still have sectoral and unemployment based impacts in certain sectors like textiles, autos, or so. But broadly, the fundamentals are strong that way. And I think this is one tariff where, which was used to be put in place for some kind of trade parities among countries, has now become a bit of a geopolitical warfare in form of sanctions. And it is a lose-lose. America is not going to come out a winner in this case. I think it's a political rhetoric. And I believe, and probably as you rightly said, that and in Russian oil, we talked about it's 11% export or contribution to the oil exports Russia has. You take away 11% of the supply in global oil supply chain, it's going to really kill the industries across the board. So I think, in our opinion, India is taking a measured approach. It still has to do something about it. You talked about really extending our trade partnerships across the world. But one thing that I think India could do very well with the kind of investments we have made in our technology, our youth, is actually moving up the value chain, right? Especially
Yes.
the service sector, semiconductors, AI, and innovation. And like what COVID did to us was to teach us how do you really strengthen our health infrastructure. Maybe this is that shakeup that India needs in terms of identifying its own, merit to the larger world. And hopefully things will fall in place. So thank you so much, Dr. Dasgupta. This is a group of people from IIM Ahmedabad. This is an NCR chapter. We do these things. We get together, really learn from experts, talk about topics that are of great interest to us. And today is one such session where we've learned a lot. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you everyone for taking time out on this Friday evening. I'm sure there are a lot of learnings that you will share with the people in your networks, and everybody gets to know about what's going on and what's India doing. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a great pleasure interacting with you all. Thank you. Have a very nice evening. Thank
Thank you
you.
so much, sir. Talk to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.